The tech billionaire woke up expecting his usual apology breakfast, but found only blood drops leading to an empty garage. His wife of 8 years had vanished without a word, leaving behind her wedding ring and a crimson stain on their marble floor. What he didn't know was that the woman he'd terrorized for years had been planning the perfect revenge, and she was already 3 moves ahead. Have you ever wondered what happens when the hunter becomes the hunted? Have you ever felt trapped in a situation where someone held all the power over you? Have you watched someone get away with terrible things because they had money and influence? This is the story of a man who thought his wealth made him untouchable, and a woman who proved him devastatingly wrong. But which one of them will survive what's coming next? Hit that subscribe button, because this revenge story will leave you questioning everything you think you know about justice. Let me take you back to where this deadly game of chess really began. She served him coffee in a $50,000 kitchen while hiding bruises under designer sleeves, perfecting the smile that had become her prison uniform. The Palo Alto mansion gleamed like a tech magazine cover. Glass, steel, and marble surfaces that reflected everything but never revealed the screams that echoed behind soundproof walls. Keisha Wellington moved through her morning routine with the precision of someone who knew the cost of mistakes. Steam rose from Marcus's imported Colombian beans while she calculated how many steps it took to reach the panic room. 43 from the kitchen island. She'd counted yesterday after he'd slammed her against the refrigerator for buying the wrong brand of cream. Your coffee, darling. The word tasted like poison, but she delivered it with honey sweetness. Marcus didn't look up from his tablet, already deep in the hostile takeover that would define his week. His jaw clenched as he read, and Keisha's body tensed instinctively. She recognized that expression. Someone was about to pay for his frustration, and she was the only target in reach. The Henderson deal fell through, he muttered, fingers tightening around his phone. 3 months of work down the drain because some bleeding heart board members got cold feet. Keisha kept her face neutral while her mind raced. The Henderson acquisition was Marcus's baby, a biotech company with promising cancer research. Losing it meant lost billions, wounded pride, and for her, a night of walking on glass. She moved toward the kitchen island, but his hand shot out faster than her reflexes. His grip on her wrist was casual, almost absent-minded, but the pressure made her bones creak. Where do you think you're going? His voice carried that deceptive softness that made her stomach drop. I haven't dismissed you yet. I thought you might want privacy for your calls. I want you exactly where I put you. His thumb pressed into the tender spot where he'd grabbed her 2 nights ago. You understand that, don't you, baby? The pet name sounded obscene in his mouth. She nodded, throat tight. His free hand traced the neckline of her silk blouse, fingers lingering over the makeup that concealed fingerprint bruises. You know what I love about you, Keisha? You learn so quickly. No backtalk, no tears, no dramatic exits, just perfect compliance. He pulled her closer, forcing her to straddle his chair. The position made her skin crawl, but resistance meant escalation, and escalation meant hospital visits she couldn't explain. Kiss me like you mean it, he commanded, phone still in one hand, while the other controlled her movement. She leaned down and pressed her lips to his, pouring every ounce of hatred into the performance of desire. He responded with the aggressive possessiveness that marked all his intimate moments, taking rather than sharing, claiming rather than loving. When he finally released her, her lips felt bruised and her soul felt smaller. Much better. He returned to his tablet as if nothing happened. I have a board meeting in 20 minutes. Make sure my grey Armani is ready and call the car service. Of course. She backed away slowly, not turning until she reached the kitchen doorway. Oh, and Keisha. His voice stopped her cold. Cancel lunch with your sister today. I need you available in case this Henderson situation requires additional attention. Her heart sank. She hadn't spoken to Kendra in 3 weeks, and their monthly calls were the only thing keeping her sane. But arguing would cost more than compliance. I'll call her now. Good girl. As Marcus left for his meeting, Keisha waited until his Tesla pulled out of the circular drive before moving to their bedroom closet. Behind the shoe rack, past the rows of designer gowns she never chose for herself, sat a small safe he didn't know existed. Inside, a burner phone, USB drives full of security footage, and a photograph that would change everything. She pulled out the photo, Marcus with blood on his knuckles, her unconscious form crumpled on the floor behind him. He'd been so proud of his handiwork that night, so confident in his control, that he'd actually posed for the security camera like some twisted trophy hunter. He had no idea she'd installed additional cameras throughout the house. Cameras that caught everything, every slap, every threat, every moment of violence he thought no one would ever witness. Today she would send this photograph to someone who could use it. Someone who'd been waiting for proof that Marcus Wellington wasn't the humanitarian tech genius the world believed him to be. Her hands shook as she typed the message on her burner phone. 3 words that would start a war. It's time, Kendra. Have you ever had to smile through pain to survive? Tell me in the comments what you'd do in her position. As Marcus left for his board meeting that morning, Keisha opened the hidden safe in their closet. Today, she would take the one photograph that would change everything. The merger deal that would make him billions became the rage that nearly made her a statistic. Marcus stormed through the front door at 11:47 p.m. like a Category 5 hurricane with a $3,000 suit and a $300 million grudge. The Henderson deal hadn't just failed. It had been murdered by his own board members, executives he'd handpicked who suddenly grew spines when it mattered most. Keisha heard his Tesla in the driveway and felt her body prepare for war. She'd spent the evening in the study, researching lawyers and safe houses on her burner phone, but none of that preparation could shield her from what came next. Keisha. His voice shattered the mansion's silence like breaking glass. She appeared at the top of the staircase, hands steady despite the earthquake in her chest. I'm here. Get down here. Now. Each step down felt like a countdown to execution. Marcus paced the foyer like a caged predator, his perfect hair disheveled, his $1 million confidence cracked and bleeding. Do you know what your husband does for a living, baby? His tone was conversational, which made it infinitely more dangerous. I build empires. I turn ideas into gold and gold into power. Today, a group of weak-minded fools decided they knew better than I do about risk management. Keisha remained silent. Speaking would be like throwing gasoline on a wildfire. $300 million. Gone. Because shareholders got nervous about ethical implications and public relations concerns. He laughed bitterly. Ethics don't pay dividends. Ethics don't revolutionize medicine. Ethics are for people who lack the vision to change the world. He moved toward her with predatory grace. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? You've never built anything. Never created anything of value. You're just decorative. The slap came without warning, spinning her head to the side and flooding her mouth with copper. But pain was familiar territory, humiliation was her daily bread. What was new was the coldness settling in her chest, not fear, but calculation. I've given you everything, he continued, circling her like a shark scenting blood. This house, those clothes, a lifestyle most women would kill for. And what do I get in return? A wife who flinches when I touch her, who acts like my affection is some kind of assault. Another blow, this time to her ribs, doubling her over. Stand up straight when I'm talking to you. She straightened, vision swimming, and saw him pulling out his phone. Her heart stopped. You know what I think you need? A reminder of how good you have it here. His fingers moved across the screen with practiced ease. I'm going to call your precious sister Kendra and tell her exactly what kind of woman her twin turned out to be. Maybe I'll send her some photos of your behavioral corrections. Please, the word escaped before she could stop it. Oh, now you want to talk? He grabbed her chin, forcing eye contact. Too late, baby. You had years to show gratitude, years to appreciate what I've built for us. Instead, you've been sulking around here like some victim in a melodrama. He shoved her backward onto the marble floor, her head cracking against the stone with a sound that echoed through the foyer. Stars exploded behind her eyes as he knelt beside her. Here's what's going to happen, he whispered, breath hot against her ear. You're going to learn to appreciate your position in this household. Starting tonight. His hands moved with brutal efficiency, tearing at her clothes while she fought to stay conscious. This wasn't about desire, it was about domination. About reasserting control when his professional world had made him feel powerless. Please, Marcus, don't. Shut up. You lost the right to please and don't about $300 million ago. The assault that followed broke something inside her that had nothing to do with bones or bruises. It shattered the last illusion that love could survive where respect had died. That marriage could exist where partnership was just another word for ownership. When he finished, he stood over her broken form with the satisfaction of someone who'd successfully reasserted natural order. "Clean yourself up," he said, adjusting his torn shirt, "and tomorrow you're going to smile at breakfast like none of this happened. Because if you don't, if you even think about running your mouth to anyone about our private business, I'll destroy every person you've ever cared about. Your sister's law practice in Houston, gone. Your mother's medical insurance in Atlanta, cancelled. That little scholarship fund you think I don't know about, dissolved." He headed toward the stairs, then paused. "Oh, and Keisha. Next time I come home with bad news, maybe greet me with enthusiasm instead of that martyred look you've perfected. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership, after all." Alone on the cold marble, Keisha felt consciousness slipping away. But even as darkness closed in, her hand found the tiny recording device she'd hidden in her bra earlier that evening. The device that had captured every word, every threat, every admission of the systematic campaign he'd waged against her identity. As consciousness faded, Keisha whispered 2 words into her hidden recording device. Words that would destroy Marcus Wellington forever. At what point does survival become more important than love? Share your thoughts below. He expected tears and apologies, but found only silence and the ghost of his own brutality. Marcus woke at 6:15 a.m. to the absence of his usual coffee aroma. The house felt different, not peaceful, but hollow, like a monument built on quicksand, suddenly feeling the ground shift beneath. "Keisha?" His voice bounced off empty walls. No response from the kitchen, no sounds of morning routine. Just the kind of silence that makes successful men remember what fear feels like. He found the master bedroom exactly as he'd left it. King-size bed, undisturbed, her side cold and untouched. The walk-in closet revealed missing clothes, gaps in the jewelry display like a smile with knocked-out teeth. The wedding ring sat on the nightstand like an accusation. Panic crept up his spine as he moved through the house. Her car was gone from the garage. Her phone, the one he monitored through family tracking apps, lay shattered on the kitchen counter. But it was the blood that stopped him cold. Dark drops led from the foyer where he'd left her broken the night before, through the kitchen, toward the garage. Not enough to indicate serious injury, but enough to prove she'd moved under her own power after he'd gone to bed. Marcus pulled out his phone and called her sister. "Kendra speaking." "Where is she?" No pleasantries, no pretense of civility. "I'm sorry, who is this?" "Don't play games with me, Kendra. Where's your sister?" A pause stretched between Houston and Palo Alto, filled with the kind of tension that precedes declarations of war. "Marcus, is that you? It's 6 in the morning. Keisha's gone. Her car, her clothes, everything. You two are joined at the hip, so I know she called you." "She didn't call me." Kendra's voice carried genuine confusion. "What do you mean, gone? Did you have a fight?" Something in her tone made Marcus hesitate. Either Kendra was an Academy Award-level actress, or she truly had no idea where Keisha had vanished to. "She'll come back," he said, more to convince himself than to inform Kendra. "She always comes back." "Marcus, what did you do?" The question hit like a physical blow. "I'm her husband. I don't have to do anything." That's not an answer. He ended the call and spent the next 3 hours calling every hotel within a 50-mile radius. No Keisha Wellington, no credit card activity, no digital footprints for a woman who'd lived entirely within his financial ecosystem for 8 years. By 10 a.m., his panic had crystallized into something sharper. Rage. How dare she leave him? How dare she abandon everything he'd built for them, everything he'd given her? He called his assistant. "Cancel my morning meetings. I need you to run a trace on Keisha's credit cards and bank accounts." "Sir, is everything all right?" "Just do it, Jennifer. And pull the security footage from the house for the last 24 hours. But when Jennifer called back an hour later, her voice carried the kind of careful neutrality that preceded very bad news. "Mr. Wellington." The credit cards have been cancelled. Mrs. Wellington closed her accounts yesterday afternoon. And sir, someone accessed your private server last night. They downloaded files from your personal directory. The phone slipped from his nerveless fingers. She hadn't just left him, she'd taken insurance. The mansion felt like a mausoleum as Marcus moved from room to room, searching for clues about how his perfectly controlled wife had orchestrated such a comprehensive disappearance. In the study, he found financial documents he didn't remember leaving out. In the bedroom, he discovered his private safe had been opened and certain photographs were missing. By evening, he understood the scope of his miscalculation. Keisha hadn't run away in tears after a domestic dispute. She'd executed a strategic withdrawal after collecting evidence for 8 years. His hands shook as he poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon. Outside, Palo Alto's sunset painted his glass walls gold, but all Marcus could see were shadows that looked like his wife's bruises. The first anonymous email arrived at 3 a.m. with video footage he thought no one would ever see, and a message, "Day 1 of your education." Have you ever realized too late that you underestimated someone? Drop a fire emoji if you've seen karma catch up. His empire built on control crumbled as someone pulled strings he didn't even know existed. Marcus stared at his computer screen as his net worth evaporated in real time. Numbers that once represented power now flashed red like warning signals on a sinking ship. Silicon Valley's golden boy watched his reflection fracture in the windows of his corner office as reporters gathered like vultures outside. "Mr. Wellington?" Jennifer's voice cracked through the intercom. "The board wants an emergency meeting. Now." 3 days since Keisha's disappearance, and his world was collapsing faster than a house of cards in an earthquake. Someone had been systematically draining his business accounts, transferring funds to shell companies that vanished the moment authorities tried to trace them. But the money was just the beginning. "Sir, there's more." Jennifer appeared in his doorway, tablet in hand and terror in her eyes. "Every board member received an email this morning. Video files. I can't stay here anymore." She placed her resignation letter on his desk and backed toward the door like he was carrying a contagious disease. "Jennifer, wait." He moved toward her with the kind of desperation that made powerful men look pathetic. "Whatever you think you saw, I can explain." "Don't." Her voice carried disgust that cut deeper than any blade. "Just don't." The door slammed behind her, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of his crumbling empire. He pulled up the email that had destroyed 8 years of carefully constructed reputation in a single morning. The video was crystal clear, high-definition footage of him slapping Keisha across their kitchen, audio that captured his threats about destroying her family, timestamp after timestamp proving a pattern of abuse that spanned their entire marriage. At the bottom of the email, a simple message. A man who terrorizes his wife doesn't deserve to lead a company that claims to value human dignity. His phone rang. Board members, investors, business partners, all demanding explanations he couldn't give without admitting to crimes he'd convinced himself were just domestic discipline. "Marcus, what the hell is this?" Robert Chen's voice carried the kind of fury reserved for friends who discover they've been harboring monsters. 8 years, Marcus. 8 years I've vouched for your character. "It's complicated, Robert." "Complicated? You beat your wife. There's nothing complicated about being a piece of trash who hits women." The line went dead. By noon, Welltech Industries' stock had plummeted 40%. By 2 p.m., major clients were terminating contracts. By 4 p.m., Marcus Wellington was unemployed for the first time since college. But whoever was destroying him wasn't finished. The package arrived at 6 p.m., delivered by a courier who vanished before Marcus could question him. Inside, Keisha's bloodied designer dress from the night he'd nearly killed her, still stiff with dried crimson evidence of his brutality. The note attached made his hands shake like leaves in a hurricane. "You wanted to own me. Now you'll pay for every bruise." Marcus dropped the dress like it was made of acid. The fabric hit his marble floor with a sound that echoed through his empty mansion, each thread a testament to the violence he'd inflicted and the justice that was coming for him. His phone buzzed with news alerts. Tech blogs were picking up the story. Social media was exploding with calls for his arrest. Someone had leaked not just the videos, but financial records showing how he'd used company resources to monitor Keisha's every movement, to isolate her from potential support systems. Wellington Tech CEO under investigation for domestic violence and corporate fraud, read the headline on TechCrunch. The man who'd built his empire on controlling every variable had become a variable in someone else's equation, and whoever was pulling the strings was 10 steps ahead of his best countermoves. As night fell over Palo Alto, Marcus sat in his darkened mansion, surrounded by the ruins of everything he'd built. Outside, protesters had gathered on his street, their chants carrying through bulletproof windows. No more silence, no more violence. His reflection in the black windows looked like a stranger, hollow-eyed, broken, afraid. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus Wellington had no idea what came next. The doorbell rang at midnight. What's more satisfying, instant revenge or watching someone's world slowly crumble? Tell me which you prefer. When Marcus opened the package containing her bloodied designer dress, the note inside made his hands shake. You wanted to own me. Now you'll pay for every bruise. She was everywhere and nowhere, in his bank accounts, his business deals, his nightmares, but never where he could find her. The private investigator's office reeked of coffee and cynicism, manila folders stacked like tombstones for Marcus's dying reputation. Frank Morrison had the kind of weathered face that came from 20 years of exposing people's ugliest secrets. But even he looked uncomfortable as Marcus paced his cramped office like a caged animal. She just vanished, Marcus insisted for the third time. People don't just disappear without a trace. Not in 2023. Not with all the technology we have. Frank lit another cigarette, ignoring the no smoking sign on his own wall. Your wife was smart, Mr. Wellington, smarter than you gave her credit for, apparently. She planned this for months, maybe years. That's impossible. Keisha couldn't organize a grocery list without my help. The investigator's laugh carried no humor. That's what every abusive husband says right before his wife takes him to the cleaners. You want to know what I found? Your wife had a completely separate life you knew nothing about. Frank spread photographs across his desk like tarot cards predicting doom. Images of Keisha meeting with lawyers, visiting women's shelters, attending support group meetings in Oakland. All while Marcus thought she was shopping or getting her nails done. Underground network, Frank continued, smoke curling around his words. Women helping other women disappear when the system fails them. Your wife wasn't just part of it. She was one of their top coordinators. Marcus felt reality shift beneath his feet. You're lying. Bank records don't lie. Phone records don't lie. Security footage from a dozen different locations showing your wife living a double life while you thought you had her under your thumb. The photographs showed a Keisha he didn't recognize. Confident, animated, laughing with other women who shared stories of survival. In every image, she looked more alive than she'd ever appeared in their mansion. She was documenting everything, Frank said, tapping ash into an empty coffee cup. Every bruise, every threat, every time you lost control, built a legal case that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. If she was so prepared, why disappear? Why not just leave? Frank's expression hardened. Because women like your wife know that leaving is the most dangerous time. That's when men like you tend to get really creative with violence. Marcus's obsession with finding her had become perversely intimate, consuming his thoughts with the same intensity he'd once used to control her body. He dreamed about her escape, woke up reaching for empty space, spent hours studying security footage of parking lots and airports, searching for a glimpse of the woman who'd outsmarted him. There's something else, Frank said, sliding a final photograph across the desk. This was taken 3 days ago in Houston. Marcus's world stopped. The image showed Keisha alive and laughing in a coffee shop, but she wasn't alone. Sitting across from her was a woman who looked exactly like her. Same face, same hair, same smile that he'd spent 8 years trying to crush. Twin sister, Frank explained unnecessarily, Kendra Wellington. Well, Kendra Morrison now, since she kept her maiden name when she got married. Successful lawyer specializing in domestic violence cases. Lives in Houston, never been married to you, and according to every record I can find, has been in contact with your wife for years. The photograph trembled in Marcus's hands. Two women who shared not just DNA, but what appeared to be a carefully orchestrated plan for his destruction. "Which one is which?" he whispered. "That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Could be either, could be both, taking turns. Hell, for all we know, the woman you married was Kendra all along." Marcus stared at the identical faces, laughing at some private joke, and understood with crystal clarity that he'd never actually known his wife at all. Every conversation, every intimate moment, every time she'd submitted to his control, it had all been performance art by a woman who was always 3 steps ahead of his cruelest impulses. "I need an address," he said, voice hollow with defeat. Frank stubbed out his cigarette and leaned back in his chair. "I already gave you more than I should have. My advice? Get a good lawyer and start practicing your apology, because whoever's pulling your strings isn't done playing yet." As Marcus left the investigator's office, his phone buzzed with another anonymous message. "Enjoying the show? Act 2 starts tomorrow." The street outside felt different, like every shadow might be hiding the woman who'd spent years pretending to love him while planning his destruction. Or women, plural. He'd thought he was hunting one desperate housewife. Instead, he'd stumbled into a web woven by 2 brilliant women who understood something he'd never grasped: the difference between being controlled and being patient. Have you ever discovered someone you thought you knew had a completely secret life? How did it make you feel? The investigator slid a photograph across the desk that made Marcus's world stop. Keisha, alive and laughing, with a woman who looked exactly like her. The woman he thought he married had been dead for 3 days, but somehow she was still destroying his life. The morgue attendant pulled back the sheet with the practiced indifference of someone who'd performed this ritual 10,000 times before, but Marcus Wellington's reaction was anything but routine. The man who'd built his fortune on reading people, on anticipating every angle, stood frozen as his world flipped inside out. It was Keisha's face on the metal table, her dark skin, her full lips, the small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident. But it was also wrong somehow, like looking at a photograph that had been subtly altered. "She was found in a Houston hotel room 3 days ago," Detective Rodriguez explained, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd delivered too much bad news. "Apparent overdose. Medical examiner says she'd been dead for hours before housekeeping found her." Marcus couldn't speak. His wife, his actual legal wife, lay dead on a slab while someone who looked exactly like her had been systematically destroying his life from 1,200 miles away. The morgue's harsh lighting turned everything the color of death, including Marcus's face as he stared at his wife's lifeless body. Her hands, folded across her chest, showed no wedding ring. Even in death, she'd managed one final act of defiance. "Mr. Wellington?" The detective's voice seemed to come from underwater. "Do you need a moment?" "How long have you known she was dead?" Marcus whispered. "We've been trying to reach you for 2 days. Your assistant said you were unreachable." 2 days. While he'd been hunting ghosts and hiring investigators, Keisha had been lying in this sterile room, her body growing cold while her revenge grew hot. The woman who'd appeared in his security footage, who'd been withdrawing his money and sending those taunting messages. It hadn't been his wife at all. "There's something else," Rodriguez continued. "The hotel room was registered under the name Kendra Morrison. But the fingerprints and dental records confirm this is definitely Keisha Wellington, your wife." The pieces clicked together with horrible clarity. Kendra had been using her own identity to create a trail, while her twin sister, his actual wife, had already been beyond his reach. The perfect alibi wrapped in the perfect revenge. Marcus forced himself to look at Keisha's face one more time. Even in death, she looked peaceful in a way she'd never appeared during their marriage. Free from the fear that had shadowed her every expression, free from the anticipation of violence that had made her flinch at his touch. "How did she die?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. "Combination of pills and alcohol. Could have been accidental, could have been intentional. We may never know for sure." Rodriguez paused. "Though given what we've learned about your marriage, I'm leaning toward intentional." The words hit like physical blows. His wife had chosen death over continuing to live in the world he'd created for her. And somehow her twin sister had turned that ultimate act of desperation into the opening move in a chess match Marcus was already losing. "Mr. Wellington, I need to inform you that you're a person of interest in Mrs. Wellington's death. The timeline of her passing coincides with some serious allegations that have come to our attention." Marcus barely heard the detective's words. His mind was replaying 8 years of marriage, searching for clues he'd missed. Had there been moments when he'd actually been talking to Kendra instead of Keisha? Had the woman who'd served him coffee and endured his rages always been plotting his destruction? The disturbing memories flooded back, Keisha's eyes during their last violent encounter not filled with the usual fear, but with something that looked almost like satisfaction. Her final words whispered into that hidden recording device now made terrible sense. She hadn't been calling for help, she'd been saying goodbye to her sister and giving permission for what came next. As Marcus left the morgue, his phone buzzed with a text from Keisha's number. "Now you know. But this is just the beginning." The message wasn't from a ghost. It was from a woman who looked exactly like the corpse he'd just identified. A woman who had every reason to hate him and all the legal training necessary to destroy him completely. Outside, Houston's humidity wrapped around him like a burial shroud. For the first time since Keisha's disappearance, Marcus understood the true scope of what he was facing. This wasn't a runaway wife or even an elaborate divorce scheme. This was a declaration of war by someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain by watching him suffer. Could you pretend to be someone else to get justice for them? How far would you go for family? As Marcus left the morgue, his phone buzzed with a text from Keisha's number. "Now you know. But this is just the beginning." Kendra didn't just want justice for her twin, she wanted Marcus to feel every moment of powerlessness Keisha had endured. Houston's skyline glittered through Kendra's law office windows as she orchestrated Marcus's destruction from 1,200 miles away. Each phone call another nail in his coffin. The woman who'd spent her career helping domestic violence survivors had become something far more dangerous. A prosecutor with a personal vendetta and the legal expertise to make it stick. "Morrison and Associates," Kendra speaking. "Is this Keisha?" Marcus's voice cracked through the phone, desperate and hollow. Kendra smiled at her reflection in the window. "No, Marcus. This is the sister whose existence you never bothered to learn about. The one who's been documenting your crimes for 8 years." The silence on the other end stretched like a held breath. "Keisha's dead." The words sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "Yes, she is. And you killed her as surely as if you'd put the pills in her mouth yourself." Kendra's voice carried the precision of someone who'd practiced this conversation in her head 1,000 times. 8 years of psychological torture, Marcus. 8 years of making her believe she was worthless, isolated, trapped. Did you really think that wouldn't have consequences? I never meant. You meant every bruise, every threat, every time you forced yourself on her when she said no. Kendra's tone remained conversational, which made it infinitely more terrifying. But we documented it all, every single moment of your domestic terrorism. She could hear him breathing heavily, probably pacing his empty mansion like a caged animal. The image filled her with the kind of satisfaction that frightened her with its intensity. "What do you want?" he whispered. "I want you to feel helpless. I want you to understand what it's like when someone else controls every aspect of your existence." Kendra turned away from the window and focused on the FBI badge sitting on her desk, Agent Sarah Chen's business card, waiting for her final call. "I want you to know that every door you might run through is already closed. This is extortion. This is justice. And unlike the system that failed my sister, I don't have to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt. I just have to make sure everyone knows who you really are." The beauty of her plan lay in its simplicity. She didn't need to break any laws to destroy Marcus Wellington. She just needed to expose the ones he'd already broken. 8 years of evidence, carefully collected and strategically deployed, would accomplish what the courts might have failed to do: complete annihilation of his reputation, his fortune, and his freedom. "The FBI will be in touch soon," she continued, savoring each word like fine wine. "Something about conspiracy, charges related to corporate fraud and domestic terrorism. Apparently, using company resources to stalk your wife raises all sorts of federal red flags. You can't prove. I can prove everything, Marcus. Every payment you made to private investigators to follow her, every time you used company phones to threaten her family, every business trip you cancelled just to make sure she couldn't leave the house without your permission. The psychological warfare was working. She could hear it in his voice, the way confidence had bled out and been replaced by animal panic. This was how Keisha had felt every day for 8 years, trapped, monitored, controlled by someone who held all the power. But Kendra's plan went deeper than legal consequences. While Marcus scrambled to save his company and avoid prison, she'd been systematically seducing information from his business associates. CEO after CEO had found themselves charmed by the brilliant lawyer from Houston, who seemed so interested in their work, so sympathetic to their challenges with difficult employees. They'd shared drinks, shared stories, and shared confidential information about Marcus's business practices without ever realizing they were talking to their target's sister-in-law. Men like Marcus surrounded themselves with other men like Marcus, and men like that couldn't resist a beautiful woman who seemed impressed by their power. "Here's what's going to happen next," Kendra said, voice dropping to the same intimate tone she'd used to extract secrets from his former colleagues. "Tomorrow morning, every major news outlet will receive a package containing 8 years of evidence documenting your systematic abuse. By noon, every streaming platform will be flooded with the videos you thought no one would ever see." "Please, did Keisha's begging ever stop you?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. "By evening, you'll be arrested on federal charges. Within a week, you'll be in jail awaiting trial. And Marcus, prison is full of men who don't appreciate wife-beaters." She could hear him sobbing now, the sound of a predator who'd finally met something higher on the food chain. "Why?" he whispered. "What's the point of destroying me when she's already gone?" "Because some people deserve to be destroyed. Because Keisha died believing she was powerless, and I need the world to know that she was anything but." Kendra's reflection in the window looked like her sister's, but with something Keisha had never been allowed to show: righteous fury. "And because I want you to spend every day in prison remembering what it feels like to be completely powerless." The call ended with Marcus's broken sobs, and Kendra felt the first peace she'd known since identifying her sister's body in that Houston morgue. Is it more powerful to fight back immediately or to plan the perfect takedown? Share your strategy. When Marcus realized the woman in his security footage wasn't Keisha but her twin, he understood something terrifying. He was playing chess with someone who'd been planning this game for years. Every door he'd used to escape consequences was slamming shut, and the woman holding the keys looked exactly like his victim. The FBI raid turned Marcus's pristine mansion into a crime scene, agents treating his marble floors like evidence of the violence they'd concealed. 27 agents swarmed through his home at 6 a.m., their boots tracking mud across surfaces that had once reflected his success and now revealed only his shame. "Marcus Wellington, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, domestic terrorism, and violation of federal stalking statutes." Agent Sarah Chen's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd been building this case for months. "You have the right to remain silent." Marcus barely heard the Miranda rights over the sound of his world collapsing. Handcuffs clicked around wrists that had once commanded boardrooms and now trembled with the reality of complete powerlessness. Through his panoramic windows, he could see news vans lining his street like vultures at a feast. The evidence boxes told the story of his destruction. 8 years of recorded phone calls, security footage from every room in his house, financial records showing systematic stalking funded through corporate accounts. Each document represented another year of his wife's silent documentation, another layer of the trap he'd never seen being built around him. "This is harassment," he protested weakly as agents photographed bloodstains on his bedroom carpet. "My wife is dead. This is all circumstantial." "Your wife's twin sister has provided quite a compelling case," Chen replied, not looking up from the evidence inventory. "Amazing how much evidence accumulates when someone documents 8 years of abuse." In his study, agents were boxing up his computers, phones, and tablets. Devices that contained years of searches for "how to monitor your wife" and legal ways to control spouses' movements. Digital breadcrumbs of a man who'd confused ownership with marriage, surveillance with love. The photographs on the walls looked different now, like evidence exhibits rather than memories. Marcus and Keisha at charity galas, her smile tight and practiced while his hand gripped her waist possessively. Images that had once represented their success now revealed the careful performance she'd maintained while building her case against him. "Sir, we found something in the bedroom safe." A younger agent held up a manila envelope Marcus had forgotten existed. Inside, photographs of Keisha's bruises arranged chronologically, medical records from emergency room visits she'd claimed were accidents, and handwritten notes in his own writing detailing behavioral corrections he'd planned to implement. His face went white as he remembered documenting his abuse like a case study, treating his wife's suffering as data points in his personal research project on dominance and control. "Jesus Christ, Marcus," Agent Chen said, studying the photographs. "You kept trophies." The word hit him like a physical blow. He'd convinced himself the documentation was for their protection, evidence that his discipline was measured and appropriate. Now, through the lens of federal investigation, it looked exactly like what it was. The careful record-keeping of a man who treated violence like a business transaction. By noon, his assets were frozen. By 2 p.m., his lawyers had abandoned him. By 4 p.m., he was in a holding cell surrounded by men who'd committed far simpler crimes than systematic psychological warfare. His cellmate was a car thief named Tommy, who looked at Marcus like he was something that had crawled out of a sewer. "What are you in for?" Tommy asked, sizing up this soft, rich man who clearly didn't belong. "Domestic issues." Marcus couldn't bring himself to say the words. Tommy's expression hardened. "You beat your wife?" The question hung in the air like a noose. In Marcus's world, his treatment of Keisha had been justified, necessary, even loving in its attempts to help her become a better person. In this world, he was just another coward who hurt someone smaller and weaker. "It wasn't like that," he protested. Tommy's laugh carried no humor. "It's always like that, rich boy. And in here, we got special rules for men who hurt women." That night, alone in his cell, while Tommy was moved to protective custody for his own safety, Marcus found one last message slipped through the bars. The handwriting was familiar, Keisha's careful cursive, though he now wondered if he'd ever actually seen his wife's real handwriting. "Tomorrow, everyone will know who you really are." Through the small window in his cell, Marcus could see Palo Alto's lights twinkling like stars. Somewhere out there, Kendra was probably watching the news coverage of his arrest, finally seeing justice for her sister's death. He'd thought he was powerful because he could make Keisha cry. Now he understood that real power meant being able to destroy someone completely while never breaking a single law. The woman who looked exactly like his victim had accomplished something no judge or jury could have managed. She'd made him understand exactly how helpless his wife had felt every single day of their marriage. Have you ever watched someone powerful face real consequences? How did it feel? In his empty mansion that night, Marcus found one last message from Keisha. "Tomorrow, everyone will know who you really are." The courtroom where Marcus once sat as a witness in corporate disputes became the stage for his own destruction. The federal courthouse buzzed with reporters and protesters as Marcus walked the gauntlet between cameras that captured his fall from Silicon Valley god to criminal defendant. Orange jumpsuit replaced his tailored suits, handcuffs replaced his Rolex, and the man who'd once commanded respect now inspired only disgust. Judge Patricia Williams presided over the bankruptcy hearing with the kind of stern authority that made grown men remember their childhood fears. The gallery overflowed with victims' advocates, journalists, and curious spectators who'd come to witness the public execution of Marcus Wellington's reputation. "Mr. Wellington," Judge Williams's voice cut through the courtroom chatter, "you stand accused of using corporate funds to finance domestic terrorism, conspiracy to commit fraud, and violation of federal stalking laws. How do you plead?" Marcus's lawyer, a public defender who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, whispered urgently in his ear. But Marcus barely heard her. His eyes were fixed on the woman sitting in the front row of the gallery, the woman who looked exactly like his dead wife. Kendra Morrison sat with perfect posture, wearing a black suit that made her look like death personified. Her eyes never left Marcus's face, and her slight smile carried the satisfaction of someone watching 8 years of planning come to fruition. "Not guilty," Marcus whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Your Honor," the prosecutor stood, briefcase in hand like a weapon. "The government has evidence that Mr. Wellington systematically abused his wife for 8 years, while using his company's resources to monitor, stalk, and terrorize her. Mrs. Wellington died by suicide after years of psychological torture, and her twin sister has provided documentation that will show the defendant's pattern of domestic terrorism." Kendra rose from her seat like an angel of vengeance. "Your Honor, I'd like to address the court." "And you are?" "Kendra Morrison, attorney at law and Keisha Wellington's twin sister." Her voice carried across the courtroom with laser precision. "I've been working with federal prosecutors for 6 months to build this case using evidence my sister collected during 8 years of systematic abuse." Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis. The woman he'd been hunting wasn't hiding. She was presenting evidence to destroy him in the most public forum possible. "My sister documented everything," Kendra continued, pulling out a tablet that connected to the courtroom's display system. "Video footage, audio recordings, medical reports, financial records showing how the defendant used corporate resources to isolate and control his victim." The first video began playing on the courtroom monitors. High-definition footage of Marcus slapping Keisha across their kitchen, his voice clear as crystal. "You exist to serve me. Everything you are belongs to me." Gasps echoed through the gallery. Several jurors looked sick. Marcus watched his own brutality reflected in dozens of faces filled with disgust and horror. The defendant treated his wife as property. Kendra's voice remained steady as video after video played. He monitored her phone calls, tracked her movements, threatened her family, and used his wealth to ensure she had no escape routes. The erotic power he'd once felt controlling Keisha now reversed itself completely. Every person in that courtroom was watching him reduced to what he'd always been, a pathetic man who could only feel strong by hurting someone weaker. "But Keisha Wellington was stronger than her abuser realized," Kendra continued. "For 2 years, she worked with underground networks to help other abused women escape. She built legal cases, provided safe houses, and saved lives even while her own was being destroyed." Marcus stared at the woman who looked exactly like his victim, understanding for the first time that he'd never actually known his wife at all. The submissive woman who'd served his coffee had been a performance. The real Keisha had been a warrior fighting a war he didn't even know existed. "My sister chose death rather than continue living under his control," Kendra said, her voice breaking for the first time. "But she made me promise to finish what she started, to make sure Marcus Wellington faced consequences for every bruise, every threat, every moment of terror he inflicted." The courtroom fell silent except for the sound of Marcus's labored breathing. "Your Honor, I want this man to spend every day in prison remembering what it feels like to be powerless. I want him to understand that some people refuse to stay victims, even in death." Judge Williams studied the evidence, her expression growing darker with each revelation. "Mr. Wellington, I've seen a lot of ugly cases in my career, but this level of systematic cruelty is beyond anything I thought possible from someone in your position." Marcus tried to speak, but no words came. He was completely exposed, stripped of every lie he'd told himself about being a loving husband who simply required high standards. "What's more satisfying, private revenge or public justice? Tell me which ending you'd choose." When Kendra stood up in the courtroom and announced her real identity, Marcus realized his nightmare was just beginning. The woman he'd been hunting wasn't a ghost. She was a brilliant lawyer who'd turned his own weapons against him. Evidence boxes stacked like building blocks of justice, each document another year of Keisha's suffering, transformed into Marcus's legal doom. The courtroom had become Kendra's stage, and she commanded it with the precision of someone who'd spent her entire career building cases against men exactly like her sister's killer. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Kendra addressed the courtroom like she was delivering a closing argument in the trial of the century. "What you're about to see represents 8 years of systematic documentation. My sister treated her own abuse like a legal case, collecting evidence with the kind of detail that would make prosecutors weep with gratitude. She moved to the evidence table with the grace of a predator who'd finally cornered her prey. Each box represented another layer of Marcus's crimes, another year of Keisha's careful planning. Box 1, audio recordings from 2015 to 2023. Over 400 hours of conversations where the defendant threatens, demeans, and psychologically tortures his victim. Kendra's voice carried the clinical detachment of a surgeon removing a tumor. Box 2, medical records from 14 different emergency room visits, each explained away as accidents but showing clear patterns of domestic violence. Marcus watched his destruction unfold with the kind of fascination people feel watching car crashes. Each piece of evidence was a nail in his coffin, but he couldn't look away from the masterpiece of revenge his wife had constructed. Box 3, financial records showing how Mr. Wellington used corporate funds to hire private investigators, install monitoring equipment, and systematically isolate his wife from potential support systems. Kendra lifted a thick folder. $230,000 in company money spent stalking one woman. The prosecutor stepped forward. Ms. Morrison, can you tell the court how your sister managed to collect this evidence without the defendant's knowledge? Kendra's smile was sharp as broken glass. My sister was a social worker before her marriage. She understood trauma, documentation, and the importance of building legally admissible cases. She installed her own security cameras throughout their home, recorded conversations on multiple devices, and kept detailed journals of every incident. She pulled out a leather-bound notebook that looked innocent enough to be someone's diary. This journal contains detailed accounts of 127 separate incidents of physical violence, 312 instances of sexual assault, and over 1,000 examples of psychological abuse. The perverse intimacy of complete exposure filled the courtroom. Every secret Marcus had kept, every private moment of violence, every whispered threat, all of it laid bare for public consumption. But the most damning evidence, Kendra continued, comes from the defendant's own documentation. He kept detailed records of his abuse like he was conducting a research study. She held up Marcus's own handwritten notes, his careful documentation of behavioral modifications and compliance strategies. Seeing his own words displayed like evidence exhibits made his stomach turn. He photographed her injuries. He recorded her begging for mercy. He treated my sister's pain like data points in some twisted experiment on human dominance. Kendra's professional composure cracked slightly, revealing the grief and rage that fueled her quest for justice. The jury looked at Marcus like he was something that had crawled out from under a rock. In their eyes, he saw himself as he really was, not a powerful businessman who demanded respect, but a coward who tortured someone who couldn't fight back. The defendant's pattern of escalation culminated in the night of February 15, 2023, Kendra said, pulling out the final piece of evidence. Security footage from their home shows Mr. Wellington sexually assaulting his wife while she was semi-conscious from previous injuries. Marcus felt bile rise in his throat. Watching his own violence through the lens of legal consequence made him understand something he'd spent 8 years denying. He was a monster. My sister died 3 days later from an overdose of sleeping pills and alcohol. Kendra's voice broke completely now. The medical examiner found internal injuries consistent with the assault captured on this footage. Keisha Wellington didn't commit suicide. She died from injuries inflicted by her husband, then chose to end her suffering rather than continue living in terror. The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs. Several jurors were openly weeping. Judge Williams banged her gavel for order, but her own face showed barely contained fury. Your Honor, the prosecutor stood. Based on this evidence, the state wishes to add charges of involuntary manslaughter and conspiracy to commit murder. Marcus's world collapsed inward like a dying star. He wasn't just facing prison for domestic violence, he was being charged with killing his wife. How does it feel to see someone get exactly what they deserve? Drop your thoughts below. But Kendra's final revelation would destroy Marcus in a way he never saw coming. She was pregnant when you killed her. Some truths are too heavy for even the strongest foundation. Marcus's world didn't just crumble, it imploded. The courtroom silence felt like a held breath as Marcus processed that he hadn't just killed his wife, he'd murdered his unborn child. The words echoed in his head like gunshots, each repetition shattering another piece of his already fractured psyche. Pregnant? He whispered the word like it was in a foreign language he couldn't understand. Kendra stood frozen at the evidence table, the medical report trembling in her hands. Even she hadn't expected this revelation to hit with such devastating force. The autopsy results had arrived that morning, adding a layer of horror to an already nightmarish case. 6 weeks, she said, voice barely audible. The medical examiner found evidence of early pregnancy. My sister was carrying your child when you beat her to death. The twisted intimacy of ultimate violation and ultimate justice converged in that moment. Marcus had spent 8 years controlling every aspect of Keisha's body, never knowing that her body was creating life even as he was destroying it. Judge Williams's gavel hit the bench like thunder. The court will recess while we process this new evidence. Mr. Wellington, you are remanded to custody pending additional charges of fetal homicide. Marcus couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process the magnitude of what he'd done. He'd thought he was disciplining a disobedient wife. Instead, he'd been slowly murdering a pregnant woman who was too terrified to tell him about their baby. The bailiffs had to carry him from the courtroom as his legs gave out. Behind him, he could hear Kendra sobbing. Not tears of victory, but the raw grief of someone who'd just learned her sister had died, protecting a secret that could have saved her life. In the holding cell, Marcus stared at his reflection in the metal toilet and saw a killer staring back. Not a businessman who'd made mistakes, not a husband who'd been too demanding, but a man who'd beaten his pregnant wife to death and never even known she was carrying his child. Why didn't she tell me? He asked the empty cell, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew the answer. She'd been protecting their baby from him. Even in death, Keisha had been trying to save the life growing inside her from the monster she'd married. The guards found him an hour later, curled up on the floor, sobbing like a broken child. The man who'd once commanded boardrooms and controlled millions of dollars in assets had been reduced to a trembling wreck by the weight of his own crimes. Wellington, the guard's voice carried no sympathy. Your lawyer's here. The public defender looked like she'd aged 10 years since the morning's revelation. Marcus, we need to talk about a plea bargain. With the pregnancy evidence, you're looking at life without parole. I didn't know, he whispered. I didn't know she was pregnant. It doesn't matter what you knew. What matters is what you did. The lawyer's voice was clinical, professional. The prosecutor is offering 25 to life if you plead guilty to all charges. Marcus laughed, but the sound came out broken and hollow. 25 years for killing my wife and baby. Seems light, doesn't it? Marcus, you need to understand something. In prison, there are hierarchies. Men who hurt women are at the bottom. Men who kill pregnant women. They don't survive long. The reality of his situation hit him like cold water. He wasn't just facing legal consequences, he was facing a death sentence from fellow inmates who had their own moral codes about violence against women and children. What do I do? He asked, but he already knew the answer. There was nothing to do but face the consequences of 8 years of choices that had led him to this moment. That night, alone in his cell, Marcus received one final message from the outside world. A letter slipped through the bars, written in Keisha's careful handwriting. Though he now understood it was actually Kendra's. You wanted to own me completely. Now you'll spend the rest of your life owned by the memory of what you destroyed. As Marcus read those words, something inside him finally broke completely. Not his pride or his ego, but the delusion that had allowed him to see himself as anything other than a killer. He'd thought power meant controlling others. Now he understood that real power was the ability to create life, to nurture it, to protect it. Keisha had possessed that power, and he'd destroyed it along with everything else he'd touched. At what point does revenge become justice? Where do you draw the line? As Marcus was led away in shackles, Kendra whispered something only he could hear, words that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Prison walls couldn't contain the magnitude of his crimes, but they could contain the man who committed them. San Quentin's concrete walls pressed close around Marcus like a grey tomb, each day identical to the last, except for the growing weight of his guilt. The news coverage of his case had made him infamous among inmates, the rich tech executive who'd beaten his pregnant wife to death and kept trophies of her suffering. "Fresh meat," someone called out as guards escorted Marcus to his new cell. "Hope you like it rough, baby killer." The words followed him down corridors lined with men who'd committed every crime imaginable, but even murderers and drug dealers looked at him with disgust. In the hierarchy of prison justice, there was no lower rung than the one reserved for men who killed pregnant women. His cellmate was a lifer named Carlos, who'd been inside for 15 years on armed robbery charges. Carlos took one look at Marcus and spit on the floor. "They put me with the wife beater," Carlos asked the guard. "Man, what I do to deserve this punishment?" "Overcrowding," the guard replied without sympathy. "Deal with it." Marcus spent his first night lying on the thin mattress, listening to Carlos sharpen something metal in the darkness. Every sound made him flinch, every shadow could hide violence, every moment brought the possibility of someone deciding to deliver their own version of justice. But it was the daytime that proved most torturous. In the yard, on work detail, in the mess hall, Marcus was surrounded by reminders of the life he'd destroyed. Other inmates talked about their families, showed off pictures of children they couldn't wait to see again, planned for futures beyond these walls. Marcus had no future to plan for, no family to visit, no children to remember him with love instead of horror. The media coverage continued for weeks. News anchors dissected his case like psychologists studying a particularly disturbing specimen. Documentary crews requested interviews. True crime podcasts analyzed his methods. Marcus Wellington had become a cautionary tale about the intersection of wealth, power, and domestic violence. But the most painful coverage came from an unexpected source: Kendra Morrison's interviews about her sister's hidden life. Keisha helped dozens of women escape abusive relationships, Kendra told CNN. While she was being terrorized at home, she was saving lives through underground networks that law enforcement couldn't or wouldn't support. Marcus watched from the prison common room as Kendra described a woman he'd never known. The Keisha of her sister's memories was strong, compassionate, brilliant. Everything he'd tried to crush out of her during 8 years of systematic abuse. She was planning to leave him, Kendra continued. She'd been building evidence for 2 years, working with lawyers and advocates to create a safe exit strategy, but she never got the chance to use it. The erotic power Marcus had once felt controlling his wife now transformed into something else entirely: complete powerlessness in the face of consequences he couldn't manipulate or escape. "My sister died believing she was trapped, but the truth is, she was never powerless. She was gathering strength every day, documenting everything, building a case that would eventually destroy her killer even after her death." Marcus turned off the television and returned to his cell. On his small desk sat a stack of letters from legal advocacy groups, domestic violence organizations, and victims' families. They all wanted the same thing: for him to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. But it was the letter from Kendra that broke him completely. Not a legal document or a victim impact statement, but a personal message that arrived 6 months into his sentence. "Marcus, I've started a foundation in Keisha's name using the assets seized from your estate. The Keisha Wellington Foundation will provide legal support, safe housing, and counseling services for women trying to escape domestic violence. Your wealth, built on controlling and terrorizing my sister, will now be used to free other women from men exactly like you. Some legacies are worth dying for. Hers will save lives long after yours is forgotten. Do you believe people like Marcus can ever truly change, or is justice the only answer?" The letter from Kendra arrived on the anniversary of Keisha's death with an invitation that would test everything Marcus thought he knew about forgiveness. From the ashes of Marcus's empire, Kendra built something her sister would have been proud of: a sanctuary for women who refused to stay broken. The foundation's headquarters gleamed with purpose: glass walls that revealed rather than concealed, meeting rooms where survivors shared strength instead of secrets. The Keisha Wellington Foundation occupied a renovated warehouse in downtown Houston, its open architecture deliberately designed to feel nothing like the suffocating mansion where Keisha had spent her final years. Every dollar seized from Marcus Wellington's assets goes directly to women escaping abuse, Kendra addressed the crowd gathered for the foundation's grand opening. His fortune, built on fear and control, now funds freedom and healing. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Marcus's seized mansion had been sold to fund safe houses. His frozen bank accounts provided legal representation for women who couldn't afford lawyers. His investment portfolio bankrolled counseling services and job training programs. The power of women reclaiming their stories and their bodies from men who tried to break them filled every corner of the building. Survivors spoke at podiums where they'd once been silenced. Children played in areas funded by money that had once financed surveillance equipment to monitor their mothers. Keisha documented her own abuse for 8 years, but she also helped other women document theirs, Kendra continued, gesturing to the wall of photographs showing Foundation success stories. Women who escaped because she gave them the tools to build legal cases. Children who are alive today because she provided their mothers with safe passage out of dangerous situations. In the Foundation's law clinic, attorneys worked pro bono to help women navigate divorce proceedings, custody battles, and restraining orders. The medical clinic provided treatment for injuries without judgment or obligation to report to authorities who might not believe their stories. Most powerfully, the Technology Center taught women how to gather evidence safely. Hidden cameras, encrypted communication apps, secure cloud storage for documents, all the tools Keisha had used to build her case against Marcus, now available to any woman who needed them. "We don't just provide services," Kendra explained to a visiting journalist. "We provide what my sister never had, a community that believes survivors, supports their choices, and helps them reclaim their power." The Foundation's success stories were featured in national magazines. Women who'd rebuilt their lives after leaving abusive relationships. Children who'd grown up safe because their mothers had access to resources and support. Families who'd survived because someone had invested in their freedom. But Marcus saw none of this success from his prison cell. His television privileges had been revoked after multiple infractions, his mail monitored and restricted. The Foundation that bore his dead wife's name operated in a world he could no longer touch or influence. "He doesn't get to watch what we build from his destruction," Kendra told a documentary crew. "His punishment isn't just imprisonment, it's irrelevance. The man who demanded to control every aspect of my sister's life now has zero impact on her legacy." The Foundation's annual fundraising gala drew celebrities, politicians, and business leaders who'd once attended charity events with Marcus and Keisha. But now they came to honor her memory while deliberately forgetting his existence. Keisha Wellington saved lives while losing her own, the keynote speaker announced. Her courage in documenting abuse created legal precedents that protect women across the country. Her death wasn't in vain, it was transformed into a movement. As the evening progressed, survivors took the stage to share their stories. Women who'd escaped because of resources the Foundation provided. Children who were thriving in homes free from violence. Families who'd rebuilt their lives with support and understanding. Each story was a testament to the truth Kendra had spent 2 years fighting to prove. Victims of domestic violence aren't powerless. They're strategists, survivors, and ultimately victors who transform their pain into protection for others. The Foundation's legal clinic had helped secure convictions against 47 abusers in its first year. The Safe House Network had provided temporary shelter for over 200 women and children. The job training program had placed 86 women in positions that provided financial independence. "My sister would be amazed by what grew from her suffering," Kendra said as the gala ended. "She spent 8 years believing she was trapped, but actually she was building something that would free thousands of other women." What would you build from the ruins of your enemy's empire? Share your vision of justice. When Marcus saw the Foundation's name on the prison television, he understood Kendra's final lesson. Some legacies are worth dying for. Forgiveness isn't about absolving the guilty. Sometimes it's about freeing the victims from carrying their pain forever. The prison visiting room's harsh lighting couldn't soften the moment when predator and protector sat face to face across bulletproof glass. 3 years had passed since Marcus's conviction, 3 years of Kendra building her sister's legacy, while Marcus rotted in solitary confinement for his own protection. "You look different," Kendra observed, studying the man who'd once commanded fear and now inspired only pity. Marcus had aged decades in 3 years. Grey hair, hollow cheeks, shoulders bent under the weight of conscience he'd never possessed during his marriage. Prison had stripped away every piece of armor he'd used to protect himself from the truth of what he was. "Thank you for coming," his voice barely carried through the intercom system. "I wasn't sure you would." "I wasn't sure either." Kendra's tone remained neutral, professional, but the Foundation's therapist suggested that confronting you might help with my own healing process. They sat in silence for long minutes, the complex intimacy of two people forever connected by violence and justice hanging between them like smoke. He was the man who'd killed her sister. She was the woman who'd destroyed his life in return. Neither could exist without the other's actions. "I dream about her every night," Marcus said finally, "about the baby. I see her face when she realized what I was, what I'd always been." "Don't." Kendra's voice cut sharp as glass. "You don't get to use Keisha's memory to make yourself feel better about being a killer." "I'm not trying to—" He stopped, recognizing the defensive pattern that had defined his entire life. "You're right. I have no right to invoke her name for my own comfort." Something in his tone made Kendra study his face more carefully. This wasn't the arrogant tech executive who'd terrorized her sister. This was something broken, hollowed out, fundamentally changed. "The other inmates call me baby killer," Marcus continued. "I've been stabbed twice, beaten more times than I can count. The guards have to keep me in isolation for my own safety." "Good," Kendra said without emotion. "You deserve every moment of fear you feel." "I do." His agreement surprised her. "But I need you to know something. I need you to understand that I know what I took from the world." Marcus pulled out a folded piece of paper, a letter he'd been writing for months, but never had the courage to send. "Your sister was 6 weeks pregnant when I killed her. 6 weeks. If she'd lived, if I hadn't—" His voice broke completely. "That child would be 2 years old now, walking, talking, calling her mama. I don't just see Keisha in my dreams. I see the future I murdered." Kendra felt tears she'd held back for 3 years finally breaking through her professional composure. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know that I understand the magnitude of what I destroyed. Not just a life, but generations of life. Not just your sister, but the family she would have built, the children she would have raised, the women she would have continued saving." The weight of lost possibilities filled the space between them. Keisha's unborn child would have been Kendra's niece or nephew, would have carried their family name into the future, would have known love instead of violence, protection instead of fear. "I can't give you back what I took," Marcus said. "I can't undo the damage or bring back the lives that should have existed. But I need you to know that every day in this cage, I'm forced to confront what I am. And what I am is unforgivable." Kendra stared at this broken man who'd once seemed so powerful, so untouchable. Prison hadn't just punished him. It had forced him to see himself clearly for the first time in his life. "What do you want from me, Marcus? Forgiveness? Absolution?" "Nothing." His answer came without hesitation. "I want nothing from you. I called you here to give you something." He slid the letter through the slot in the glass partition. "This is a full confession. Every crime I committed, every moment of abuse, every lie I told myself to justify hurting her. My lawyers don't know I wrote it, and I don't want anything in return." "Why?" "Because the Foundation deserves the complete truth. Because other women need to understand how men like me think, how we justify our crimes, how we manipulate the system to avoid consequences." Marcus looked directly into her eyes for the first time. "And because Keisha deserved better than the lies I told about our marriage." Kendra took the letter with trembling hands. She'd spent 3 years building a foundation on her sister's memory, but this confession would provide something she'd never had: insight into the mind of the monster who destroyed her family. "There's something else," Marcus said quietly, "something I need to ask you, even though I have no right." "What?" "What was her favorite song?" The question broke something inside Kendra that legal victories and Foundation success hadn't touched. For the first time, Marcus had asked about Keisha as a person instead of as a victim. He wanted to know something beautiful about the woman he'd destroyed. "Amazing Grace," she whispered. "She used to sing it when she was scared or sad." Even as a child, when we were afraid of thunderstorms, she'd sing that hymn until we both felt safe. Marcus closed his eyes, and for the first time since his arrest, Kendra saw her sister's killer as a human being who had lost everything too. Not because she forgave him, but because she finally understood that his punishment was complete. Could you ever forgive someone who destroyed someone you loved? What would it take? Marcus's final question changed everything. What was her favorite song? For the first time, Kendra saw her sister's killer as a human being who had lost everything too. Justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like making sure the story ends with hope instead of hatred. The Foundation's annual gala sparkled with possibility as survivors shared stages with celebrities, their voices carrying further than their pain ever had. 5 years after Keisha's death, the organization built from her suffering had become a national model for supporting domestic violence survivors. We gather tonight not to mourn what was lost, but to celebrate what has been built from that loss. Kendra addressed the crowd from the same podium where Marcus had once delivered keynote speeches about innovation and disruption. Now she used his former stage to discuss real innovation, systems that protected women instead of betraying them. The evening's honorees included a federal judge who'd streamlined protective order processes, a tech executive who'd developed encrypted communication apps for abuse victims, and a teenager who'd started a support group for children who'd witnessed domestic violence. Keisha Wellington never lived to see her foundation, but she lives in every woman who finds safety here, every child who grows up free from violence, every survivor who transforms their pain into power. Kendra's voice carried across the ballroom with the authority of someone who turned grief into purpose. In the 5 years since Marcus's conviction, the foundation had expanded to 12 states. Safe houses bearing Keisha's name provided temporary shelter for over 2,000 women and children. Legal clinics had secured convictions against 347 abusers. The job training programs had placed more than 800 women in positions that provided financial independence. But perhaps most importantly, the foundation had changed how society understood domestic violence. Keisha's story, documented in books, documentaries, and academic studies, had shifted public conversation from questioning victims to examining systems that enabled abusers. My sister spent 8 years documenting her own abuse, but she also created a blueprint for other women to follow, Kendra continued. Her evidence-gathering techniques are now taught in law schools. Her documentation methods are standard practice in women's shelters. Her legal strategies have been adopted by prosecutors nationwide. The Foundation's Technology Center had become a hub for developing tools that helped women gather evidence safely. Apps that looked like games but secretly recorded conversations. Jewelry that contained GPS tracking devices. Cloud storage systems that preserved evidence even if abusers destroyed phones or computers. We don't just react to domestic violence, we prevent it, Kendra explained to the audience. Early intervention programs in high schools teach young people to recognize unhealthy relationship patterns. Workplace training helps colleagues identify signs that someone is being abused. Community education programs help neighbors understand how to support victims without putting them in greater danger. As the evening progressed, Marcus remained locked in his prison cell, unaware of the celebration happening in his former world. His life sentence without parole meant he would never see how Keisha's death had been transformed into a movement that saved countless lives. Some people ask if I've forgiven my sister's killer, Kendra said during the gala's final speech. Forgiveness isn't about him, it's about me choosing not to carry hatred that would poison the work we're doing. Marcus Wellington is irrelevant to Keisha's legacy. He's a footnote in a story about triumph over evil. The gala's final presentation honored the Foundation's most significant achievement, legislation named after Keisha that required law enforcement agencies to develop specialized protocols for domestic violence cases. The Keisha Wellington Act had been adopted by 37 states and was pending in Congress as federal law. As guests mingled during the reception, survivors shared stories of rebuilding their lives with Foundation support. Children who'd grown up in safe houses were now college graduates, young professionals, parents raising their own children in homes free from violence. "Your sister saved my life," a young woman told Kendra during the reception. not directly, but through the tools your foundation provided. I was able to document my ex-husband's abuse and get sole custody of my daughter. She's 6 now, and she's never seen violence between adults who are supposed to love each other. Similar conversations happened throughout the evening. Women who'd escaped because of legal representation the foundation provided. Families who'd survived because of safe housing. Children who'd grown up knowing that love doesn't hurt. Near the evening's end, Kendra found herself in the foundation's memorial room, surrounded by photographs of Keisha at various stages of her life. Not the crime scene photos or evidence exhibits that had dominated her sister's public image, but pictures of a vibrant woman who'd loved music, helped others, and dreamed of a better world. The memorial room also displayed letters from Marcus, not to Kendra or the foundation, but to other inmates who'd asked him about domestic violence. His brutal honesty about the psychology of abuse had become an unexpected resource for understanding how abusers think and operate. He writes to men who are serving time for similar crimes, the foundation's director explained to visiting researchers. His letters don't excuse their behavior, but they help counselors understand the thought patterns that lead to abuse. It's not rehabilitation, it's education for people who work with abusers. Marcus's confession letters had been compiled into a training manual used by law enforcement agencies, social workers, and domestic violence advocates. His detailed descriptions of manipulation tactics, control strategies, and escalation patterns helped professionals identify abuse earlier and intervene more effectively. Even his punishment serves Keisha's mission, Kendra reflected, looking at her sister's photograph. Everything he destroyed has been transformed into tools that protect other women. As the gala ended and guests departed, Kendra walked through the foundation's quiet corridors, past meeting rooms where support groups met, offices where lawyers built cases, and safe spaces where women rebuilt their lives after escaping violence. The foundation's success hadn't brought Keisha back or healed the wound of her loss, but it had transformed that wound into something powerful, proof that victims of domestic violence aren't powerless, that evil can be defeated by determined goodness, and that love doesn't die with the person who embodied it. In the Foundation's counseling center, a new relationship had quietly bloomed between Kendra and Dr. James Martinez, a trauma therapist who joined the team 2 years earlier. Their connection had grown slowly, built on shared mission and mutual respect, rather than the desperate need that had defined Kendra's earlier relationships. When he touched her, it was with hands that asked permission, eyes that saw strength instead of vulnerability, love that empowered instead of consumed. Their intimacy felt revolutionary after years of witnessing what happened when men confused ownership with affection, control with care. "You're building something beautiful from something terrible," he told her one evening as they reviewed applications for the Foundation's newest safe house. "Keisha would be proud of who you've become." "I became who she always knew I could be," Kendra replied, understanding finally that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but transforming it into wisdom that protected others. Their relationship represented everything Marcus had failed to understand about love. Partnership instead of domination, support instead of control, growth instead of diminishment. Two whole people choosing each other rather than one person trying to consume another. As they worked together late into the night, reviewing cases and planning programs, Kendra felt the peace that comes from knowing your life has meaning beyond your own happiness. Every woman they helped, every child they protected, every abuser they stopped was proof that Keisha's death had not been in vain. The Foundation's work would continue long after Kendra was gone, expanding and evolving to meet new challenges. Other women would lead it, guided by the principles Keisha had died to establish. That victims deserve to be believed, that survival requires community support, and that healing is possible even after the worst betrayals. Marcus would spend his remaining years in prison, forgotten by the world he'd once dominated, irrelevant to the movement his crimes had inadvertently inspired. His legacy was one of destruction and shame. Keisha's legacy was one of protection and hope. The story that began with a woman trapped in a golden cage had transformed into something infinitely larger, a movement that refused to let evil have the final word. So what would you do? Choose revenge or choose healing? Would you build something beautiful from something broken? Tell me in the comments what you think real justice looks like. If this story moved you, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about the power of resilience. Share this with someone who needs to know that no one has to stay broken forever. And remember, the best revenge isn't destroying your enemy's life, it's building something so beautiful with yours that their darkness can never touch it again. The emerald-clad woman stepped from the limousine and a gasp echoed across the manicured lawns of the Charleston mansion. By her side, a man held her hand, and in front of them, 3 identical baby carriers held a secret that would shatter the groom's perfect day. This was not a story of revenge, but of a family he claimed he never wanted. Now a living, breathing testament to her new life. Have you ever watched someone get exactly what they deserve? Not with anger, but with an elegant, silent triumph. Follow along as we unpack the layers of a story built on heartbreak, deceit, and an unexpected act of love. To understand how she got here, we have to go back to a time before the triplets, before the vengeance, and before the man who saw her worth. He was already walking away, and she was still holding the ring. The Hamptons estate, a vast monument of wealth and ambition, had once been their home. Now it felt like a gilded cage, a prison of shattered promises. The argument had been building for weeks, quiet digs turning into a war of words, until it erupted by the infinity pool. The water's surface, a cold, endless mirror, reflected the two of them. Him, a man who saw his life as an ever-expanding empire, and her, a woman who only wanted a place to belong. Richard, the master of charming manipulation, had dropped the act. The smile was gone, replaced by a ruthless smirk. "Motherhood is for women with a simpler purpose, Maya," he had said, his voice a cold blade. "You're too old now, and your little dreams." Insignificant compared to my legacy, the words weren't just spoken, they were thrown like stones, each one hitting a different part of her heart. A sharp flashback cut through her pain. A year ago she stood on this very spot, in his arms, his touch a warm comfort. The memory of his hands on her waist, the whisper of forever against her skin, was a phantom limb she couldn't amputate. It was a painful reminder of the love she had believed was real. He had promised a future with children, a family, and a home that was more than just a house. Now, standing here, she knew it had all been a lie. The salt spray from the ocean felt less like a breeze and more like the stinging tears she refused to shed. He turned his back on her, his perfectly tailored suit a final symbol of his indifference. This wasn't a man who had changed his mind. This was a man who had lied from the start. Have you ever felt like you were holding on to a promise that had already been broken? Tell me your experience with a love that changed in the comments below. Her hands clenched the expensive ring he'd given her. It wasn't a symbol of a future anymore. It was a weapon. She just didn't know yet how she would use it. She relocated to Atlanta to start anew, not realizing she was walking straight into a trap designed by the only man who knew how to destroy her. Atlanta had felt like a fresh start, a clean slate. Maya poured every ounce of her energy into rebuilding her interior design business, finding solace in the careful lines of a blueprint, the texture of a new fabric. Her office, a bright, sun-drenched space, was her sanctuary, a city of potential stretched outside her window, a constant reminder that she could still build something real on her own. But Richard was a ghost in her new life, an unseen force that kept undermining her efforts. The rejection emails began to pile up, each one a polite corporate way of saying no. The sunlight streaming into her studio seemed to mock her as she read the words that killed another contract. "We've been advised against working with you." Her heart would pound every time a phone call came from an unknown number. A visceral memory of Richard's voice on the phone, once a warm reassurance, now a cold, mocking dismissal, made her blood run cold. His laugh on the other end of the line, a sound that used to make her skin warm, now made her blood run cold. He didn't have to do anything directly, he just had to whisper a few words into the right ears, a few lies about her lack of professionalism, her past. He was using their history, their intimacy, as a tool to hurt her. The final insult arrived in the mail, a thick, cream-colored envelope addressed to her. The wedding invitation. It wasn't a peace offering, but a declaration of war. He wanted her to witness his victory, to see his new, younger bride to feel the weight of her own failure. How do you fight back against a ghost from your past that is still trying to control you? How do you stand up for yourself when no one else is in your corner? Share your thoughts below. She stared at the pristine card, and a new, dangerous resolve settled in her heart. He thought he could break her. She was about to show him what happens when a woman rebuilds herself with something stronger than his empire. He wanted to parade his new life, his new bride, his new everything. She decided to give him a show he'd never forget. The snide message from Richard's sister was the final push. "He can't wait for you to see how he's moved on." The words were meant to be a final, demoralizing blow. Instead, they were a match dropped into a pool of gasoline. Maya sat at her laptop late that night, the screen casting a cool glow over her face. She wasn't looking for a business opportunity or a new client. Her search history held the secrets of her quiet desperation. Fake husband for hire. Rent a family. She was ready to play his game. Then a different kind of query. Something less transactional, more honest. The search bar, a digital confessional, held the secrets of her quiet desperation. Until one night, a different kind of profile appeared, one that offered more than a solution. It offered a connection. The profile picture was of a man with kind eyes. He was a stranger, yet something in his gaze felt like coming home. She found herself imagining what it would feel like to have his hand on her back, his arm around her. The fantasy felt more real than her actual life had in years. The thought of a stranger, an actor, playing a part so close to her heart made the line between fiction and reality feel thin, delicate. This wasn't just about making Richard jealous. It was about creating a new narrative for herself, a lie that felt more true than the truth. It was a risk, a leap of faith into a deep unknown. Have you ever faked it until you made it? What's the biggest risk you've taken to get what you want or to reclaim your dignity? Share your story in the comments. She sent the email, fingers hovering over the send button for a moment before she let it fly. "I need a husband and a family for one night," she wrote. She had no idea that on the other side of that screen, a man was reading the words that would change both their lives, not as a business transaction, but as a desperate plea he couldn't ignore. And he was about to make her an offer she never saw coming. She had a list of demands, a script in her head, and a wall around her heart. He had one simple question that changed everything. The coffee shop was upscale and quiet, a place where people spoke in hushed tones, as if discussing important, delicate things. The clinking of porcelain and the quiet hum of conversation were the soundtrack to her carefully planned performance. Maya sat across from the man from the profile, Michael. He was even more handsome in person, with a gaze that was steady and kind, not like a man assessing a business deal, but a man looking for the person behind the pretense. The scent of roasted coffee beans filled the air, a warm contrast to the clinical coldness of their conversation. She laid out her rules, her demands, the entire script of the show she wanted to put on for Richard. "This is a performance," she said, her voice firm. "It's a business transaction." Nothing more. He listened, his expression unreadable, a small smile playing on his lips. When she finished, he didn't counter her points or negotiate a price. He simply leaned forward, his gaze steady and kind, and asked, "What did he do to you?" The question was a hammer striking glass, and her wall shattered. It was more intimate than any physical contact. It was a question that asked for access to a part of her she'd kept locked away. And she found herself wanting to answer. He didn't need to touch her to make her feel seen. His simple question was a recognition of her pain, and it disarmed her completely. When has someone asked you the one question you didn't know you needed to hear? That one question that made you feel truly seen? Share it in the comments below. As they shook hands on their agreement, he didn't just let go. He held her hand for a moment longer than necessary. "The rules are a good start," he said, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "But the most interesting part of the story is what happens when you decide to break them." He walked away, leaving her with a racing heart and a new set of questions. She thought she was rehearsing a lie. What she didn't know was that he was showing her what the truth could feel like. Their first rehearsal was in a bustling city park. Maya felt stiff, awkward, like an actor with a bad script. The sun was a warm weight on her shoulders, and the sound of children playing was a gentle melody. She watched as he effortlessly navigated the park, a wide-brimmed hat on his head, the strollers in front of him a shield and a prop all at once. He didn't just walk, he moved with the ease of someone who belonged there, a stark contrast to her own stiff posture. He didn't just play the part of a father, he became one. He cooed at the babies, adjusted their blankets, and spoke to them in a soft, low voice. He seamlessly integrated into her world, not just playing a part, but genuinely connecting with her. When he leaned in to whisper a direction in her ear, his breath was a warm promise against her skin. The proximity, the careful, practiced touches, felt less like a performance and more like a stolen moment. She began to relax, to find a rhythm with him, a flow that felt surprisingly easy. What does it mean when a lie feels more comfortable than the truth? When someone you just met sees you more clearly than someone who's known you for years? Tell me your thoughts below. As they drove back, a new kind of silence settled in the car. It wasn't awkward, it was charged. He pulled over to a quiet street, and a simple question hung in the air. Why triplets? He had seen past the ruse, the spectacle, and straight to the heart of her pain. Her answer was a secret she never planned to share with a stranger. He said I was too old, she whispered, and for the first time the lie felt real. She had built a life on a foundation of vengeance. He offered her something different, a foundation of hope. The city lights stretched out before them like a blanket of scattered stars, each one a promise of a life being lived. But in the quiet darkness of the car, their own lives were a universe, small and infinitely complex. Maya sat in silence, the truth she had so casually dropped hanging heavy in the air. Her deepest vulnerability, the one she had tried to bury, was now exposed to a stranger. Michael didn't flinch, he just listened. He saw the years of emotional abuse, the cruel words that had haunted her. He told me I was too old, she whispered again, her voice shaking. The words came out, raw and painful, a memory that had left a scar. He said my dreams of a family were just a joke. Michael shifted, and in the small, quiet, intimate bubble of the car, he revealed his own past, a story he had kept hidden from the world. He spoke of his own quiet desire for a family, his own private heartbreak. The triplets were a secret he was keeping, a promise he had made. The walls crumbled completely. They were no longer a business arrangement, but two people with a shared, unspoken longing. Michael's character deepened. He was not just kind, he was deeply empathetic. He didn't ask for permission, he simply leaned in, his gaze searching hers, and then his lips were on hers, a gentle, tender pressure that felt like an unspoken promise. It wasn't about desire, it was about seeing and being seen, a silent acknowledgement that they were two broken pieces that fit together in a way neither of them had anticipated. When has someone's vulnerability made you feel brave enough to share your own? What does it mean when a connection transcends words and feelings become a shared language? Tell me below if you felt that. After a long moment, he pulled away, and the silence in the car was heavier than before, but with a new weight. The weight of possibility. He reached for a small satchel on the back seat, unzipped it, and pulled out a stack of documents. We can call off the wedding plan, he said, his voice soft, but I can't call off this. The triplets are real. They're my children, and I'm looking for a home for them, a real one, with a mother who'd love them. He placed the adoption papers in her hands, and her world, the one she'd so carefully constructed, shattered completely. She came to him for a lie to save her pride. He offered her a truth that would heal her heart. The dimly lit street where they were parked felt like a liminal space between her old life and her potential new one. The city lights blurred into a long, shimmering smear of gold and red, reflecting the chaos of her thoughts. The adoption papers on her lap felt heavier than any weapon she had ever imagined wielding against Richard. This wasn't a fake family. This was a real one. Michael, a man she had met for a transaction, was now a single father, a protector, and a man seeking a partner. He wasn't just a solution. He was a man with a heart as broken and as open as her own. The wedding plan was now an opportunity for Maya to find a purpose far beyond revenge. A new kind of contract was proposed, not for a performance, but for a family. Maya was deeply conflicted. The desire for a family she'd given up on clashed with her fear of vulnerability and the enormity of the responsibility. Michael's character shows his depth and genuine nature. He isn't just a solution, he is a man seeking a partner. He simply held her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles in a silent, comforting rhythm. It was a simple touch, but it spoke volumes, promising support without demanding anything in return. When has an opportunity presented itself that was completely different from what you were looking for, but was exactly what you needed? Tell me in the comments below. She looked from the adoption papers to his face, her heart a drum against her ribs. "I can't pretend to be their mother for a night," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I can be their mother for life." Michael's face, which had been so guarded, broke into a relieved, hopeful smile. Little did they know, this new bargain would have an unforeseen consequence that would put a target on their backs. Their relationship was no longer a performance. It was real. But real love is a target, and Richard was a sniper. Maya and Michael's connection grew stronger, a bond built on shared hopes and honest confessions. They spent their days in secluded parks with the triplets, their little family a quiet sanctuary away from the world. A sudden, unseasonal chill swept through the park, rustling the leaves and raising goosebumps on Maya's arms. The feeling was familiar, a quiet dread she had only ever associated with one person. Richard was a ghost in their new life, a constant, unseen threat. He had discovered that Maya had a new partner and children. His attempts to sabotage their new life became more personal and dangerous. He wanted to expose them, but for a reason far deeper than simple jealousy. He began to dig into Michael's past, a flash of protective instinct. Michael's hand on her back, guiding her away from the playground, a silent shield against the world. His hand on the small of her back was no longer a prop. It was a promise. He leaned in and whispered in her ear, "I've got you." And the simple words sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the cold. What do you do when the past tries to sabotage your future? How do you protect a love that is still fragile from an outside threat? Share your experience in the comments. An email arrived from a source she didn't know, a link to an old news article. The headline was innocuous enough. Prominent Austin Tech CEO's scandalous past. She clicked on the link, and as the image loaded, her blood ran cold. The man in the picture was not Richard. It was Michael. The man she was falling for had a secret. The triplets she was falling in love with were the key to that secret. Maya stared at the picture, her heart a drum against her ribs. The man she was falling for had a secret. She felt a familiar knot of fear and betrayal tighten in her stomach. She confronted him that night, the moon casting long shadows in their shared apartment, making the space feel both familiar and foreign. The moonlight sliced through the blinds, painting stripes of silver across the floor. The quietness of the apartment was a fragile thing, about to be shattered by a truth they had both been hiding from the world. He didn't deny it. He revealed the true, full story of his past, and the real reason he was looking for a mother for his children. The triplets were not his. They were the children of a friend. His best friend had been a prominent Austin Tech CEO who had been framed by his business partner and sent to prison. Michael had promised his friend he would raise the children as his own. He pulled her into his arms, not with passion, but with a desperate need for comfort. "I'm not a hero," he confessed, his voice breaking. "I'm just a man who made a promise to a friend." She kissed him then, not just with her lips, but with a quiet acceptance that spoke volumes. It was a kiss that said, "Your secrets don't scare me. Your heart is what I want." Can you truly love someone without knowing their entire past? Does trust come from knowing everything, or from accepting that you don't? Comment with your thoughts. He told her the last crucial piece of the story, and the pieces finally clicked into place. The reason he had lost his company, the reason he had the triplets, and the reason Richard was now hunting him. "Richard was the one who framed him," Michael whispered. "He's the reason my friend went to prison, and he's the reason I have the girls. And he won't stop until he gets them too." They had a secret. Richard had a weakness. The wedding was no longer a performance. It was a battlefield. The wedding was no longer about revenge. It was about justice. The triplets were not just a prop, but a living representation of the truth Richard had tried to bury. Maya and Michael now had a plan. one that would dismantle Richard's empire and protect their new family. The glow from the monitors illuminated their faces in Michael's secret office. A strategic map of Richard's financial empire was spread out before them. This wasn't a game of social humiliation, it was a high-stakes play for their lives and their future. Their relationship strengthened, built on a foundation of trust and shared purpose. Maya became more assertive, and Michael was humbled by her unwavering support. A moment of shared exhilaration. The thrill of being a team, of working together against a common enemy. He leaned over the table, his arm brushing hers as he pointed to a company on the map. The touch was quick, but it was enough to send a jolt through her, a rush of energy that was part strategy, part desire. When you're in a fight, is it better to have a partner who is your mirror or your opposite? Who helps you fight your battles? Tell me your story. He handed her a small flash drive. Everything we need to take him down is on here, he said, but we can't use it. Not yet. The last thing we need is a public scandal. We have to wait for the right moment. The moment would come at the wedding, and the signal for that moment would be a word from one of the triplets. The ballroom was a stage for a fairy tale wedding. They were there to make sure it ended like a Greek tragedy. The ballroom in Charleston shimmers under crystal chandeliers. The sound of a classical quartet is punctuated by the hushed whispers of the guests. Maya, radiant in her emerald dress, felt the weight of every gaze on her. The light from the chandeliers glinted off the fabric of her dress, and she felt less like a guest and more like a queen walking into her court. The air was thick with expectation, and Richard's face, pale and visibly shaken, was a masterpiece of silent panic. He was losing control, a concept he had never been able to accept. Maya wasn't playing a part, she was living her truth. Michael, her silent partner and her anchor, placed his hand on her back, a simple touch that grounded her. His hand on her back was a steady, warm weight, a silent promise that he was there in the middle of a room full of strangers, just for her. Have you ever walked into a room and felt all eyes on you? That moment of power when you know you've already won. Describe that feeling in the comments. As the ceremony concluded and the reception began, Michael raised his glass. A toast, he announced, his voice carrying through the room. To new beginnings and old promises. The words hung in the air, a coded message that only Richard understood. The real game was about to begin. He wanted a perfect day. She was about to give him a perfect nightmare. The reception room, a sea of white linen and silver flatware, became a stage for psychological warfare. Michael's toast was the first shot. A series of seemingly accidental whispers and planted information began to circulate among the guests, spreading rumors about Richard's past professional dishonesty. The meticulously curated perfection of the room began to fray at the edges, the whispers like tiny threads pulling at the intricate design. Richard, once the king of this castle, now looked like a nervous prisoner, his gaze darting around the room, searching for the source of his undoing. Michael and Maya worked as a single unit. Their coordination was a testament to the depth of their connection. He brushed against her as he moved through the crowd, a hand on her arm, a quick, intimate touch that said, "It's working. We're winning. Is a quiet victory better than a loud one? What's the most satisfying revenge you've ever seen or heard about? Tell me below." A new, anxious look crossed Richard's face as one of the triplets' faith began to gurgle. He leaned down to quiet her, a nervous smile on his lips. And then she said the word, perfectly clear, loud enough for a few people to hear, the word that only he and Maya knew. Papa. He thought he had buried his past. He didn't know the past was about to speak, perfectly and clearly, from the mouth of a child. The silence that followed the word Papa was heavier than any noise. It was a palpable stillness that filled the room, broken only by the gasp of a few onlookers who heard it. The opulent room, so full of noise and laughter just moments before, became a tomb. The only sound was the faint gurgle of a baby and Richard's ragged breath as he stared at the child. The word was a signal, a key to a secret he had tried to bury. He knew what it meant. Maya felt a rush of real victory, not just a fleeting moment of revenge. Michael's hand found hers under the table, a gentle squeeze that said, "We did it." His hand, warm and firm, found hers beneath the table, and the simple contact was a celebration, a silent victory that felt more powerful than any toast. Richard's composure completely broke, revealing his true, desperate nature. He was no longer the charming mogul, he was a man terrified of a child. When has a single word or a tiny detail revealed a giant truth? What was the moment you realized something was not what it seemed? Share your thoughts below. As the crowd began to whisper and point, Richard's face was a mask of panic. He ran from the room, and the final piece of the puzzle fell into place for Maya. The man he'd framed, the man Michael had promised to save. It was Michael's brother, and the girls were his nieces. Richard's rage wasn't just about money, it was about family. It was about his own sick, twisted version of justice. The truth was about to come out. They had won the battle. Now they had to win the war. The fallout from the wedding was immediate. The news of Richard's professional crimes spread, fueled by the information on the flash drive and the surprise witness who came forward. The spectacle in Charleston had done its job. The battle was won. Now they had to win the war for their own peace and future. Maya and Michael began a new chapter of their lives, focused on family and building something real. Their new home in Atlanta, a quiet contrast to the chaos they'd just been through, was their sanctuary. The Atlanta skyline, a city of new beginnings, looked different now. It was no longer a place of quiet desperation, but a city of 1,000 possibilities, a place to build a family, a place to heal. Their relationship became a beacon of what is possible when love is built on honesty and trust. The trauma from the past was now a story they could tell, a scar they could live with. The kiss was not about passion or desire, it was about the quiet relief of a battle won, the silent acknowledgement that they were a team, now and forever. His hands on her waist, pulling her close, felt like coming home. Is a happy ending something you can find, or something you have to build? What does happily ever after look like to you? Tell me below. As the triplets slept in the nursery, Maya watched him from the doorway, her heart full. He turned to her and smiled, a smile that reached his eyes. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you," he said, and she knew in her soul that the question wasn't about a life he could give her, but a life they could build together. She once looked for a way to get revenge. She found something better, a family, a purpose, and a love that was hers by choice, not by contract. Michael's proposal was not just about him and her, but about all of them. A quiet moment in the nursery with the triplets. The room is a sanctuary of peace and love. The nursery, filled with soft light and the gentle snores of 3 sleeping babies, was a testament to the life they had built. The small, peaceful room was a universe of its own, safe and whole and full of promise. He took her hand, a simple gesture, and placed it on her heart. "I'm not asking you to be a stand-in," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm asking you to be their mother. I'm asking you to be my wife. I'm asking you to be my family. I'm asking you to be the one I choose every single day." She kissed him, a kiss that felt less like a promise and more like a truth she had been waiting her entire life to tell. In his arms she felt a sense of belonging she had never known. A quiet, settled feeling that told her she was home. They were a family, not by blood, but by choice, a choice that had brought them from the brink of despair to the heart of love. So what would you have chosen? The path of revenge or the path of love? Tell me what choice you would have made. If this story showed you that sometimes what looks like a tragedy is just the beginning of a beautiful love story, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories that remind you that the best revenge is living a good life and that the greatest love is always the one you choose. Tell me in the comments what part of Maya and Michael's journey resonated with you the most. And remember, the most powerful love story you will ever have is the one you write for yourself.